Hey, what's up, Nathan? Thank you so much for joining me today. How's your day going?
Good, good. Hey, Joe. It's good to see you. I'm doing
Yeah.
great.
For people watching this, maybe if you want to just give a little intro about yourself and Bear Engineering.
I'm Nathan. I'm the co-founder of Bear Engineering. We founded the company, my wife and I, we're both civil engineers. And so we founded the company in 2010 and we relocated to the Bay Area in 2018. And so since then, we've been doing foundation and drainage inspections. We had a background in that in our prior location, which was Hawaii. Then we moved here. We focused on foundation and drainage inspections. So a lot of real estate related foundation and drainage inspections, both buyers and sellers, and also for homeowners who just have concerns about their house.
So as a real estate agent, that's super helpful. And I actually just use you guys for my own home as well to get an inspection. And one of the ways that I find that your service to be really useful is that, oftentimes you have home inspections done, pre-sale home inspections, or I'm representing buyers, they're looking at a house. We have home inspections, and then the home inspector will say something like, get an expert to look at this, cracks in the foundation, movement, have somebody else look at this, right? And one pitfall that I've always run into is, you get in 10 different foundation companies and you get 10 different prices and estimates and ideas and all these kind of things because you guys don't have a conflict of interest. You guys aren't doing the work. You guys are just doing the report, the inspection, and giving additional details, a lot of details. You guys have really detailed, great reports. I find that that lack of conflict of interest and the detailed reports allows you to take that report now and provide it to multiple companies to get bids for that kind of work and compare it apples to apples. Is that a pretty accurate assessment?
Yeah, we've taken a little bit of unique approach in that we don't do any work ourselves. Sometimes people think that's not the best because we want you to also fix it, especially if they trust us. But the reality of it is that there really should be a separation between the diagnosis phase and the repair phase. And that doesn't exist with a lot of companies out there. And not to say that they're always trying to skew it one way or another necessarily. Even in the best of intentions, sometimes there can be some potential conflict of interest of skewing it towards something that is a job when it could be put off for a while. It's not of that sort of urgency. Or there's another way to do it that's a little bit less costly, less lucrative for maybe the repair. Or sometimes the contractor doesn't necessarily have all the tools in their tool belt, and so they might come forward with a repair that isn't necessarily all the options. So we really take an approach that there needs to be complete independence between those phases, especially in a home buyer situation. So a home buyer is trying to make an evaluation, do I buy this or not? And then they need that budgetary number, not necessarily like a quote to do it. They need to know the options. We've been in the industry a long time. We work with a lot of contractors. We've done some design ourselves. So we have a good feel of what the budgetary price ranges are. We present that in a way that's easy to understand and then give you contractor referrals so that you can get quotes when you're ready. And the bottom line too, and if you have foundation work, which is usually, fairly expensive to super expensive, you need 3 quotes anyway. So, one quote's good, but it's just one of 3 data points really that you need as well. And so we try to be in the middle range, give a range, give options, give referrals, and then prioritize it. It's kind of a must do, do it in the next few years, put on the back burner. We view it from their perspective. We try to have a lot of empathy for the client. I've personally bought a couple of houses in the past and kind of been burned too before I was in the industry of a conflict of interest. We're very cognizant of that and see it from their perspective as a buyer. And then you still see it as a seller's perspective too. We don't want to unduly disadvantage this house by a report that isn't objectively accurate. And so we're always in the middle. We're seen as straight shooters, independent, objective, and we think that's what the market needs.
So with that being said, can you give us maybe a little bit more info or some examples or something of like a common issues that you see or run into here in the San Francisco Bay Area?
On our website under foundation drainage inspections, we have sample reports. So in this case here, this will kind of run us through an example here of, in this case, the house had some movement, which a lot of houses in the Bay Area do. And so that's diagnosed through the floor elevation survey. And that's kind of what's the main thing that's lacking in a home inspection report is taking readings using this manometer to relative changes throughout the house. And so this tool will measure the change over time. So assuming the house was built level, which is a fairly reasonable assumption, the movement changes is generally related to, foundation movement, and that is generally related back to soils. So in this case, the house had some movement. There's different degrees. Not all movement's really bad. Some is. In this case, we had, various options for a repair. monitoring. So sometimes the right answer first is monitoring. We know it's moved, but how much is it going to move in the future? Hard to predict. So monitor it further. So that's kind of an example. Put in a lot of pictures. The pictures kind of tell the story. People get tired of just hearing engineers or inspectors ramble on about stuff. And so try to show a lot of pictures. In this case too, we've got examples here for what people can do. The reports are in order of priority. So what you should tackle first is higher in priority of the report. Drainage goes along with foundations because it's usually water that's at the root of most foundation related issues. And so it's hard to diagnose foundation issues without having the drainage picture as well, and kind of vice versa. So they always go together. So there's usually lots of options for drainage. And so we kind of look at good, better, best solutions, and depends on the budget too, right? We don't get to come in as engineers and design a solution for somebody if their budget doesn't fit, there's limitations. People tend to spend a lot of money in the Bay Area to just get into a house, and they're kind of maxed out. And so then it's a question of what does your budget sustain now? What can it sustain in the future? What's the risk of delaying a little bit? So the report kind of gives you examples of what we look at, how we take pictures, go through it. Lots of illustrations too. It's hard to tell people about drainage, but if you show them a picture, what these things look like, they get it pretty quickly. In case of seismic, we also look at seismic or earthquake related risks for houses. And so, showing people quickly what a bolt and brace system looks like. The pictures kind of tell that story. So that's very useful. And when it comes to underpinning and stabilizing houses, everything's done below ground, things you can't see. That's kind of what's the hard part of the foundation and soils, is that you can't see below the soil. So you almost have to in your mind explain how things are happening. And sometimes not without us. We don't always have a soils report too. So oftentimes a process of elimination of what's causing that. That's what we have also kind of in the report. We look at what are the possible causes of foundation movement, and we can usually rule out a lot of them. And we know that's not certain things. So then by default, it tends to be other things. And so that's discussion in our report. And then we have a lengthy list of contractors, foundation and drainage contractors in the area that we've come across. And they're not ones that we're saying use them per se, but these are the options: get quotes, talk to them, look at their Yelp reviews. And so that's kind of, a good example of the service that we provide.
One question that might be on a lot of people's minds, especially if they're thinking about buying a home, is, are there areas that tend to have higher risk of these sorts of issues or be more expensive than other ones? From my own anecdotal kind of understanding, just being a realtor going through a lot of homes, I found that at least in San Mateo County, which is where I do a lot of my business, we tend to see a lot of this stuff in the flat areas east of El Camino Real or east of 101. Is that kind of what you guys are seeing, or is there also some other areas that might have some common issues?
We've done 2,500 inspections in the Bay Area now, roughly. And so we have a pretty good feel of what's out there. And it really varies, on different regions. So we've, put together a summary of our inspections. The house icons indicate places that we've personally inspected. And then we've color coded them based on the degrees of movement, the amount of the floor elevation reading, the maximum difference across the house. And so, like you said, San Mateo here, you see, a number of red and black sort of indications through there. You go down here, some parts of South San Jose, lots of green. Come over here into Willow Glen, lots of red, old San Jose. Lots of areas, hillsides, mountain, the foothills and stuff, kind of hit or miss, depends on the age, the construction, how close they were to rock or not. So with all of this, before we come onto a site, we have a pretty good feel of what to expect. And we kind of already knew this just by doing it, but once we visually kind of present it, it's easier to kind of understand, quicker to train individuals. We can kind of show people how they stack up. So, people are usually curious, how does this house compare to the one next door, right? Because they're usually buying in a certain area, in a certain price range. And so what's kind of the status quo for that area? And am I an outlier or am I normal? Same sort of thing with the homeowner. They're kind of curious, where they stack up. Is my house, better than the neighbors or worse? And we don't go into detail specifically to the neighbors, and the data isn't every house around, but it can give you a sense for this area, what to expect. And then sometimes you don't feel so bad, if hey, every house here is off by this much, then it's just kind of a function of usually the soils. It's usually the way they build it. The areas of San Mateo, Foster City is a lot of landfill areas, and so, as you can imagine, bringing in a whole bunch of dirt from somewhere else and piling it on top of clay makes it prone to issues. Some of the soil science wasn't as well understood when back in the day. It's kind of in the 60s and 70s that the soil engineering and science that really ramped up to where, maybe nowadays they do things a little bit different. Although they still they developed redwood shores in the 90s, knowing that houses would move somewhere between 4 to 6 inches potentially. They studied it and this house could move a lot. And so they accepted that risk. And it's not of a structural nature. That's a key thing too. There's movement of a structural nature. Like there are houses on hillsides that are sliding down the hillside that won't stop. Like gravity is always going to happen. It's always going to rain and be dry. And so these factors won't stop. So you have to do something. There's plenty of other cases where it will stop. There's cases where you just don't know yet. There's all different tiers of that. And so it's a very complicated final decision on what to do or not do. It takes into consideration the client's priorities, their expectations, their goals, their budget. The Bay Area is ripe, as you saw with the map. Like there's all kinds of areas of issues and pockets. And there's some good areas too. And that's not even overlaying the seismic risks. When you overlay the whole earthquake, liquefaction risks, there's other layers onto it besides just the movement. But the earthquake risk we kind of all live with regardless, to some degree.
That's great. That's very helpful. So, I have the opinion that 100% of people should get a foundation inspection at some point if they own a home, just because why not? It's $600, $700, $800, even if you have not one crack, not one issue, just get it. Peace of mind. If you know you're going to live in the house for a long time, obviously not everybody does that. So are there any specific signs that maybe if a homeowner sees these particular things or notices something, is there anything specific that they see that you say, hey, you know what, this might seem to be a little bit bigger of an issue or nothing? You should give us a call. You should get an inspection.
There's some good educational things on our website to use this as a reference afterwards for people watching this. So there's some videos. You can watch a video that talks about indications of foundation settlement. And we talk through all that in a video. And then we have a lot of just educational displays down here of different aspects related to that. So going down here, one of the big ones would be cracks that form around the corners of windows and doors that indicates some sort of differential settlement, like the house is moving in some way versus the other, and that puts stress on the house and it causes a crack. It doesn't mean it's like concerning overall settlement. Sometimes it moves up when it rains because it's expansive soils generally, and it goes down when it dries, and it leaves a crack behind inside the house. But the net result as a floor survey still comes out pretty good. There's not like a net sinking of the house, just up and down, up and down. So it's not all perfectly moving up at the same time, because then you wouldn't have any cracks. Like the house would just be like 1 inch higher and then 1 inch lower, and there'd be no stress to cause those sorts of cracks. But in general, the soils, aren't that uniform. So they do different things. Some parts of the house have better drainage than other parts. All these different kind of factors play into it. So the cracks around windows and doors is one indication. Super hairline ones can just be like thermal expansion and contraction sometimes, or material tolerances. But the one that gets to be more concerning is like a slope of the floor when you walk into a house and you can kind of feel yourself, sloping off. Or you sit in your office chair. This is a common one with COVID. People working out of their house, now their office chairs like sliding across the house. Things like that as indications that it is moving to some degree. And that's where the floor survey comes in to give numbers behind that. It can be just, within tolerances. The general tolerance is 1 inch and 20 feet. And so if a 40-foot long house, 2 inches, kind of the starting point for the discussion, not saying that at that point you have to do something, or less than you shouldn't do something. The sloping floors is a good indication. Outside cracks sometimes, although stucco is prone to cracking regardless. Doors sticking, not working. But that can also be a case where one season they work and the other season they don't. It just really depends. Like there's all these different factors that go into it. And the key thing though, as you said, like for homeowners, is to have a baseline. So once you have a baseline survey when you own the house, what's it changing over time? Is it any sort of net change that is of significance? Is it worth stabilization? So there's ways to stabilize it and ways to stop it, but it involves going down very deep into the earth, into a more stable soil or rock to keep that. So that's just an inherently expensive process. And ideally, every house in the Bay Area would have been built down to bedrock. Ideally, they would have built the Millennium Tower down to bedrock, right? And then didn't, sort of thing. It's a similar sort of concept, but it's not always economical to drill all the way to bedrock for houses. And it's just a function of it's going to happen in the Bay Area. Some people think their house is going to fall over with a few cracks. That's very rarely the case for a flat lot house. So sometimes it's not safety so much, but preserving the value of your house, your asset. If you go to sell it in 10 years and your house is off 3 or 4 inches and it's got big cracks, you're going to have like a harder time selling it to somebody. So it's not
more concerns about the condition.
Yeah. And the value goes down. Your asset value can go down. I mean, if it's a crazy boom market like it was, a few months ago, buyers just buy anything, but when it tightens, whenever you sell your house, it's going to depend on what sort of the market conditions are. The starting question was signs of movement. I think a lot of people kind of pick up on it, they sense it, and they kind of feel it and know it. And that's just where that baseline is just really the most important thing to have. Foundation inspection involves going in the crawl space, of course, and going through that. But it's kind of rare that we see something down there that's truly, truly different than what we expect to see based on the floor elevation results. Sometimes, but people have this misconception of like, oh, if there's no cracks down there, someone went through the crawl space and didn't see any cracks and it's fine. It's completely not the case, because if you have rebar or the steel inside the concrete, it just moves as a whole. It doesn't, the rebar is there to stop cracking. And so, I have houses 6 inches off that have no cracks in the foundation. It'll crack in the house, of course. The drywall will crack, the outside will crack. But just the indications in the crawl space are not like the end all. It's mainly the floor survey. And that's the missing piece from the home inspection industry requirement. It's just not a requirement in the Bay Area to do that. It's not part of the standards of practice. But without that, all you're left with is like, yeah, it feels flat or it feels sloped, but no numbers behind that. So that's really one of the main values of a foundation inspection, besides looking at it from an engineer standpoint that understands the soils, the structural related aspects of a house.
Cool. Well, hey, Nathan, thank you so much. That was very, very helpful and informative. I really appreciate it. If somebody's watching this, what's the best way that they can get in touch with you, your company, schedule an inspection?
We really have everything online. I mean, you can call us, and if we're not on the line with somebody else, we can chat. But in general, you can go on here and you can click down through, you can see our pricing, you can read about the scope. It's a little bit more if the house is far from the peninsula, a little bit if it's older, it's a bit more. And then you just go on here and click on the button for schedule, and you just find a time on our calendar that works. Go through and pick the time and answer some questions, pick how fast you want the report, and then it's scheduled and it's done. So, you're welcome to, people are welcome to call and email and we'll chat. But in general, it's also probably half people just go straight to booking, especially agents who kind of know that they need it. The website's a good resource, like I showed, for education, watch the videos, educate yourself as much as possible. It makes sense. You could look on Google and find horror stories about everything, right? And so online research is good, but be careful kind of the path you go on to learn stuff. So it's a good resource. And then people can always reach out for questions. And I guess lastly, while I still have you on too, if you have questions that don't really necessitate yet on-site visit from the cost standpoint, we have here our remote consultation service on our website. And so this is where we go through via Zoom, chat like this, or on FaceTime, or just send pictures and talk on the phone. Got this home inspection report. They said this. What do you think of this? And we can look at our data. We can look at all the information we can gather from public data sources, our own data, and give people kind of a high range. This is a low risk house, medium, or high risk. So that's been very valuable. It's been a growing part of our business. The biggest limitation is that the floor survey is really the most important thing. So without that floor survey, you're always still in a little bit of a guess work.
Thank you so much again. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Perfect.
Great chatting. All right.
Thanks.
See ya.